Please, sir. If we sing and play the piano for you, will you give us some food? Even just leftover bread. That's what 10-year-old Catherine asked on stage at the Williams Theatre, right before the city's most famous orchestra was about to perform. Her words made everyone in the fancy theater laugh at her and her twin sister. But when they let the girls get close to the piano, just to make fun of them even more, the twins started playing and singing. And everyone went completely silent, shocked by what these two homeless children could do. Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, please let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? New York? London? Maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. The rain was cruel that night, and everything around seemed to drown in darkness and cold. But despite that, Catherine gathered every tiny bit of courage she had left and whispered to her twin sister with a shaky, rough voice that sounded like it was barely holding on to life. Every word she spoke came out with pain, like it was using up the last drops of strength she had in her small, freezing body. Christine, we have to try. We have to go in there, Catherine said, her breath coming out in little clouds that disappeared into the freezing air. The cold was so mean and sharp that it made the two twin sisters look like tiny ghosts about to fade away completely. Raindrops fell from the dark sky and stuck to the girls' tangled, dirty hair, running down their thin faces and dripping off their chins. Their soaked clothes clung to their bodies, making them look even smaller and more helpless than they already were. Christine was shaking so violently it seemed like her whole body might just break into pieces. Her lips had turned a scary shade of blue-purple. Catherine, I can't feel my hands anymore. Everything hurts so much, she sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself, her voice so weak it was almost swallowed by the sound of rain hitting the ground. I'm so hungry it feels like something is eating me from the inside. Catherine, the older twin by only 10 minutes but feeling like she had to be as brave as someone much, much older, squeezed her sister's frozen hand as tight as she could. She tried to send warmth through that touch, tried to push courage and hope from her heart into Christine's. But the truth was she barely had any warmth, courage, or hope left herself. Please, Christine, stay with me, okay? Don't close your eyes. We're going to make it through this night. I promise, Catherine said, forcing her voice to sound strong even though inside she felt like crying and giving up. The wind howled around them like it was laughing at their misery, pushing them back, trying to knock them down. But the girls held on to each other and kept standing. There they were, two skinny little girls, fragile as glass, abandoned by the world, ignored by everyone who passed by. Their clothes were torn and dirty, their shoes had holes in them, and their stomachs growled loudly with hunger that felt like fire. And yet, these two small children stood across the street from the enormous, glowing Williams Theatre like they actually believed they had a right to hope. Like they believed that somehow, somewhere inside that beautiful building full of rich people and warm lights, there might be just one person with a kind heart. The theater looked like a palace made of gold. Every window blazed with bright, cheerful light. Warm air seemed to pour out of it, making the rain around it look softer somehow. Through the tall glass doors, Catherine could see people dressed in clothes more expensive than anything she'd ever touched, women in sparkling dresses and men in perfect black suits, all of them laughing and talking without a care in the world. Beautiful music floated out into the cold night. Piano music, soft and sweet, like a lullaby from a dream. Christine heard it too, and for just a second her shaking slowed down. That music, it sounds like when Mama used to sing to us. Catherine felt her throat get tight. She remembered their mother's voice, remembered how safe she felt wrapped in her mother's arms, remembered the songs that made everything feel okay even when the world was falling apart. But their mother was gone now. Had been gone for 5 long years. And the girls had been alone ever since, fighting every single day just to survive one more night. Mama taught us to sing too, Catherine whispered, more to herself than to Christine. She said we had special voices. She said we could make people feel things with our music. Christine looked up at her sister with eyes that were red from crying and exhaustion. Do you really think they'll listen to us in there? Do you think they'll give us food? Catherine looked at the theater again. At all those wealthy people who had never known what it felt like to be this hungry, this cold, this desperate and alone. She didn't know the answer. She didn't know if anyone inside that beautiful building would even see them as real children, or if they would just see dirty, homeless kids who didn't belong. But she knew one thing for certain. If they didn't try, they might not survive the night. I don't know if they'll listen, Catherine admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But we have to try. We have nothing left to lose. Christine nodded slowly, too tired and weak to argue. She trusted her sister. She always had. Even when Catherine's plans didn't work out, Even when they got chased away or yelled at or treated like trash, Christine knew that Catherine was trying her best to keep them both alive. The two girls stood there for another moment, gathering what little strength they had left. The rain kept falling. The cold kept biting. The hunger kept burning. Across the street, a shiny black car pulled up to the theater entrance. A doorman in a fancy uniform rushed forward with a big umbrella. He opened the car door, and out stepped a woman wearing a thick fur coat that looked softer than clouds. Diamonds sparkled at her neck, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows everywhere. The woman laughed at something the doorman said. Her laugh sounded light and easy, like someone who had never worried about food or warmth or having a place to sleep. Behind her came a man in a black suit so perfect it looked like it had been made just for him. He was smoking something that made sweet-smelling smoke curl into the air. He smiled and waved at someone inside the theater. "Look at them," Christine whispered. "They're like people from a story. Like they're not even real." Catherine nodded slowly. These people did seem like they were from a different world. A world where rain was just something that made you open an umbrella, not something that soaked through your only clothes and made you shake until your bones hurt. A world where night was the time for fancy parties and beautiful music, not the time to find a doorway to hide in so you wouldn't freeze to death. More cars arrived. More beautiful people stepped out, laughing and talking and disappearing into the warm, bright theater. Through the open doors, Catherine could see golden walls, huge paintings in fancy frames, and a giant light made of crystal hanging from the ceiling like a frozen waterfall. And that music. The piano music kept flowing out into the cold night, and every note felt like it was calling to Catherine and Christine, reminding them of better times, of their mother's love, of the dreams they used to have. "Catherine," Christine said, her voice so quiet now that Catherine had to lean close to hear. "What if they laugh at us? What if they're mean?" "Then we'll leave," Catherine said, trying to sound brave. "But at least we'll know we tried." She took her sister's icy hand in hers. Both their hands were shaking, from cold, from fear, from hunger that made them feel dizzy and weak. "Ready?" Catherine asked. Christine took a deep, shaky breath. "Ready." Together, the two small girls stepped off the curb and into the street. A car honked at them and they jumped back, hearts pounding. But then they tried again, moving faster this time, half running across the wet pavement. The rain seemed to fall even harder, as if the sky itself was trying to stop them. Water splashed up from puddles, soaking their legs even more. The wind pushed against them like an invisible hand trying to shove them back into the darkness where they belonged. But Catherine kept pulling Christine forward, and Christine kept following, trusting her sister with everything she had. They reached the other side of the street and stood at the bottom of the red carpet that led to the theater entrance. The carpet was protected by a fancy cover, so it was completely dry, the only dry spot on the entire street. A huge man in a security uniform stood at the entrance. He had his arms crossed over his chest, and his face looked hard and unfriendly. His job was to keep the wrong kind of people out. People like Catherine and Christine. But before the security guard could say anything, before he could tell them to get lost, 4 people came out of the theater. 2 couples dressed in the most expensive clothes Catherine had ever seen. "Desmond Jackson was absolutely magnificent tonight," one of the women was saying, her voice loud and excited. "The way he played that piano, it was like magic. Pure magic." "Indeed," agreed one of the men, nodding like he was very smart and important. "Jackson is a true master. The greatest pianist in the whole country without question." "And Madame Esther's performance," the other woman added, putting her hand over her heart dramatically. Her voice could move stones to tears. "I've never heard anything so beautiful." The 4 elegant people walked right past Catherine and Christine like the girls weren't even there. Like they were invisible. Or maybe they did see them but chose to look away, not wanting to let poor, dirty children ruin their perfect evening. The people climbed into a waiting car and drove off into the rainy night, still laughing and talking about the wonderful music they had heard. Catherine felt something twist inside her chest. These rich people had just listened to the most famous musicians in the city. They had been warm and comfortable and entertained. And now they were going home to soft beds and hot meals. Meanwhile, she and Christine were standing in the rain, starving and freezing, about to beg for scraps. But there was no time to feel sorry for herself. The security guard had noticed them now. His eyes narrowed and his face got even harder. Catherine knew that look. She had seen it 100 times before. It was the look adults gave to homeless children. A look that said, "You don't belong here. Get away from me." But Catherine refused to run away. Not this time. Not when Christine's lips were turning blue and her sister could barely stand up straight. She pulled Christine forward, and together they stepped onto the red carpet. It felt strange under their feet, soft and dry and expensive. For just a moment they were out of the rain. For just a moment they could pretend they belonged in a place like this. The security guard was walking toward them now with angry steps. His face was red and his hands were curled into fists. "Hey," he shouted. "What do you think you're doing? Get off that carpet right now. This is a private theater for paying customers only." Catherine's heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. Her mouth felt dry. Her legs felt like jelly. Every part of her wanted to run away and hide. But she thought about Christine, about her sister's frozen hands and empty stomach. She thought about their mother, about the promise she had made to always protect Christine no matter what. She thought about the music floating out of the theater, music that sounded like hope. And she opened her mouth to speak. "Please, sir," Catherine said, her voice shaking but determined. "We don't want to cause any trouble. We just want to ask if we can sing for the people inside. Me and my sister, we can sing really well. Our mama taught us. If we could just sing one song, maybe play the piano." "Are you crazy?" the security guard interrupted, his voice full of disgust. "Look at you. You're filthy. You smell. You think anyone in there wants to see or hear homeless kids? This is the Williams Theater, not a charity house for street rats." Each word hit Catherine like a slap. Street rats. That's what he called them. Like they weren't even human. Christine started crying, silent tears mixing with the rain on her face. But Catherine didn't move. She kept standing there, kept holding her sister's hand, kept hoping against hope that somehow, this wouldn't end like all the other times. "Sir, please," Catherine tried again, her voice breaking now. "We're so hungry. We haven't eaten in 2 days. If we could just sing in exchange for some food, even old bread that you're going to throw away anyway, we would be so grateful. Please." The security guard's face turned even redder. He looked around, checking to see if any important people were watching. Then he grabbed Catherine's shoulder with a rough hand and started pushing both girls back toward the street. "Get out of here before I call the police," he snarled. "You're making this place look bad. Go on, get." He shoved them hard and Catherine stumbled, almost falling. She caught Christine before her sister could hit the ground, and they both staggered backward off the red carpet and back into the pouring rain. The security guard brushed off his uniform like touching them had made him dirty. Then he turned and walked back to his post, muttering angry words under his breath. Catherine and Christine stood there in the rain, soaking wet again, shivering harder than before. The brief moment of being dry was already just a memory. Christine was crying harder now, her small body shaking with sobs. "I told you," she whispered through her tears. "I told you they wouldn't help us. Nobody ever helps us." Catherine felt her own tears start to come, hot against her cold cheeks. Christine was right. Nobody ever helped them. The world had decided that 2 homeless little girls didn't matter, didn't deserve kindness, didn't deserve to live. But then, through the fog of despair and exhaustion, Catherine saw something. Along the side of the theater there was a smaller door. It was partially hidden behind some bushes and it was slightly open. A worker came out carrying a trash bag, and when he went back inside, the door didn't close all the way. It stayed open just a crack. Catherine's heart started beating faster again, but this time not from fear. From possibility. "Christine," she whispered, pulling her sister close. "Look. That door. It's open." Christine followed her gaze and saw the door. Her eyes went wide. "Catherine, no. We can't. That's even worse than going through the front. If they catch us sneaking in?" "If we don't try, we'll freeze to death out here," Catherine said firmly. She cupped her sister's face with both hands, making Christine look at her. "Listen to me. Mama used to say that our voices were special. That our music could touch people's hearts. Maybe if we can just get inside, if we can just get someone to actually hear us sing, they'll understand. They'll help us." Christine looked doubtful, but she was too weak and too cold to argue anymore. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we'll try." Catherine took one more look at the security guard. He was facing away from them, watching the front entrance for more important guests. "Now," Catherine whispered. Hand in hand, the 2 girls ran across the wet pavement to the side of the building. They ducked behind the bushes, their hearts pounding so loud they were sure someone would hear. But no one came. No one shouted. No one saw them. Catherine pushed the side door open a little more. Warm air rushed out, hitting their frozen faces like a gift from heaven. Inside she could hear voices, footsteps, the sound of instruments being tuned. She could also hear that piano music, much louder now, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. "Come on," Catherine whispered to Christine. And together, scared but desperate, the two homeless girls slipped inside the Williams Theater. The warmth inside the theater wrapped around them like a blanket, and for a few seconds Catherine and Christine just stood there, feeling the heat sink into their frozen skin. It felt so good that it almost hurt. They were in a narrow hallway with plain white walls. Nothing fancy like the golden lobby they had seen through the front doors. This was clearly a place where workers moved around, not where rich people walked. The hallway was empty, but Catherine could hear voices and footsteps coming from somewhere nearby. Her heart hammered in her chest. They had to move quickly before someone found them. "This way," Catherine whispered, pulling Christine deeper into the hallway. They crept forward, staying close to the wall, ready to hide if anyone appeared. The floor was hard under their feet, and their wet shoes made soft squeaking sounds with every step. Catherine worried that the sounds would give them away, but the noise from elsewhere in the theater was loud enough to cover their movements. As they moved forward, the hallway opened up into a wider area. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. They had reached backstage. It was like nothing the girls had ever seen before. The space was huge and filled with organized chaos. Workers in black clothes rushed back and forth carrying music stands, chairs, and heavy equipment. Some were speaking into headsets, coordinating with people Catherine couldn't see. Others were checking clipboards and barking instructions. Thick black curtains hung everywhere, creating walls that could be moved. Ropes and cables snaked across the floor like sleeping snakes. Tall metal structures held lights that could probably shine brighter than the sun. And everywhere, stacked against walls, sitting on wheeled platforms, leaning in corners, were instruments. Violins in their cases, a huge golden harp wrapped in protective cloth, drums of all sizes, and brass instruments that gleamed under the backstage lights. But what really made Catherine's heart skip was what she saw in the center of all this activity. A piano. Not just any piano. A grand piano, black and shiny, so beautiful it looked like it was made from polished night sky. It sat on a wheeled platform ready to be rolled onto the stage. A man in coveralls was bent over it, carefully tuning the strings inside. Catherine stared at that piano like it was the answer to all her prayers. She remembered the old, broken piano in the abandoned warehouse where she and Christine used to practice. That piano had been missing keys and made strange buzzing sounds, but the girls had loved it anyway. They had spent hours there, playing the songs their mother had taught them, pretending they were real musicians performing for real audiences. Then one day the warehouse was torn down and their piano was destroyed. They hadn't touched a real piano since. "Catherine, look," Christine whispered, pointing. Through a gap in the curtains the girls could see the stage itself. It was massive, bigger than any room they had ever been in. The wood floor gleamed like glass. Giant lights hung from the ceiling, ready to illuminate everything below. And beyond the stage, through another gap in a different curtain, Catherine could see the audience. Row after row of red velvet seats stretched back into the darkness, and almost every seat was filled with well-dressed people. They sat talking quietly to each other, reading programs, checking their watches, waiting for the show to begin. Catherine felt her courage start to crumble. There were so many people. Hundreds of them. And all of them were rich and important, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Catherine and Christine would see in their entire lives. How could two dirty, homeless girls possibly stand in front of all those people and ask for help? "Catherine, I'm scared," Christine whispered, pressing close to her sister. "There are so many of them. What if they all laugh at us?" Catherine was scared too. She was terrified. But she was also so hungry it felt like her stomach was trying to eat itself from the inside. And Christine looked so weak that Catherine worried her sister might actually collapse. "We've come this far," Catherine whispered back. "We can't give up now." A voice suddenly shouted nearby, making both girls jump. 5 minutes to curtain. 5 minutes? Where's Jackson? Someone find Jackson. Workers began moving even faster, their movements more urgent. The man who had been tuning the piano closed the lid and rolled the platform toward the stage. Other workers grabbed chairs and music stands, carrying them out onto the stage in precise positions. Catherine grabbed Christine's hand and pulled her behind a tall stack of equipment boxes. They crouched down, making themselves as small as possible. From their hiding spot, they watched as the backstage area slowly emptied. Workers disappeared into the wings, the sides of the stage hidden from the audience. The chaotic energy settled into a tense, waiting silence. Then Catherine heard footsteps. These weren't the quick, practical steps of workers. These were slower, more confident steps. The steps of someone important. A man walked into view, and even from their hiding spot, Catherine could tell he was someone special. He was tall and wore a black suit that fit him perfectly. His dark hair was slicked back, and his face was handsome but hard, with sharp features and cold eyes. He walked with his chin up like he owned the world. "That's him," Christine breathed. "That's Desmond Jackson." Catherine had heard the name before. Everyone had. Desmond Jackson was the most famous pianist in the city, maybe in the whole country. People said he could make a piano sing, cry, and laugh all in one performance. They said his concerts sold out months in advance and that rich people paid huge amounts of money just to hear him play. Following behind Jackson was a woman in a long flowing red dress that sparkled like it was covered in rubies. Her blonde hair was piled high on her head in an elegant style, and her makeup made her look like a painting. She moved with grace and confidence, her head held high. "Madame Esther," Christine whispered. The famous singer. Catherine had heard her voice once, drifting out from a store's radio. It had been beautiful, strong and clear, hitting notes that seemed impossible for a human voice to reach. Jackson and Madame Esther stood together in the wing, preparing to go on stage. A young woman with a headset approached them nervously. "Mr. Jackson, Madame Esther, the audience is ready. We'll begin in 2 minutes." Jackson waved his hand dismissively. Yes, I know the schedule. Go." The young woman hurried away. Jackson turned to Madame Esther. "Another performance for these wealthy fools who wouldn't know real music if it bit them. But they pay well, so we smile and play." Madame Esther laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. "They'll throw their money at us either way. Though I must say Williams pays better than most. I suppose that's why we tolerate his little theater." Jackson smirked. "Indeed. Shall we give them something to talk about at their dinner parties?" "Always, darling. Always." Catherine watched them with a sinking feeling in her stomach. These people didn't seem kind. They seemed proud and cold and mean. Would they really help 2 homeless girls? But before she could think about it more, the lights in the theater changed. The backstage area grew darker while the stage lights came up, bright and beautiful. Music began to play, the orchestra taking their positions, warming up with quick scales and runs. Then a voice boomed out over speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Williams Theatre is proud to present tonight's performance featuring the incomparable Desmond Jackson on piano and the magnificent Madame Esther, accompanied by the City Symphony Orchestra." The audience burst into applause, the sound washing over everything like a wave. Jackson and Madame Esther walked onto the stage, smiling and waving. The applause grew louder. People stood up, clapping harder, showing their appreciation before the performance had even begun. Catherine watched through the gap in the curtain as Jackson sat at the beautiful piano. He adjusted the bench, stretched his fingers, and placed his hands on the keys with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Then he began to play. The music that poured from that piano was like nothing Catherine had ever heard before. It wasn't just sound, it was emotion made real. The notes danced and leaped, whispered and roared. Jackson's fingers flew across the keys so fast they were almost a blur. The audience sat in complete silence, mesmerized. Then Madame Esther began to sing, and her voice joined the piano in perfect harmony. Her voice soared above the music, clear and powerful, hitting notes that made Catherine's skin tingle. Christine clutched Catherine's arm. "They're so good," she whispered, and Catherine could hear the hopelessness in her sister's voice. "How can we possibly compare to that? We're just kids who learned from Mama. We don't have training. We don't have fancy clothes. We don't have anything." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes because Christine was right. They were nothing compared to these professionals. Who were they to think they could stand on that stage? But then Catherine remembered something. She remembered lying in their mother's arms, cold and hungry even back then, listening to Mama sing. Mama's voice hadn't been trained like Madame Esther's. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been full of love, full of warmth, full of hope. And Mama had always said that music wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest. It was about touching hearts. "Christine," Catherine whispered, "we may not be as good as them, but we have something they don't have." "What?" Christine asked. "We're singing because we have to. Because it's life or death. That means something." Christine looked at her sister with wide eyes, then slowly nodded. The performance continued. Jackson's hands flew across the keys. Madame Esther's voice filled every corner of the theater. The orchestra played behind them, adding layers of sound that made the whole thing feel magical. Finally, after what felt like both forever and no time at all, the music ended with a powerful final chord that seemed to shake the building. Silence. Then the audience exploded with applause. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering and shouting, "Bravo!" Flowers were thrown onto the stage. Jackson and Madame Esther bowed deeply, smiling and waving, soaking up the praise. Catherine watched all of this, her heart pounding. The performance was over. Now was her chance. If she was going to do this, if she was going to ask for help, she had to do it now while everyone was still on stage, while there was still an audience to hear them. But how? How could she get Jackson's attention? Then she saw it. The orchestra members were standing from their chairs, taking their bows. Some were already starting to walk off stage. In the chaos of curtain calls and congratulations, no one was paying attention to the wings anymore. "Christine," Catherine whispered urgently. "We're going out there." Christine's eyes went huge. "What?" "Catherine, no. We can't just walk onto the stage. We have to. It's our only chance." Catherine grabbed her sister's hand. "Trust me. Please." Christine looked terrified, but she nodded. The two girls crept out from behind the equipment boxes. Their hearts hammered in their chests. Their legs felt like jelly. But they kept moving forward, step by step, getting closer to the bright lights of the stage. They reached the wing where they could see everything. The stage, the audience, Jackson and Madame Esther still bowing and basking in applause. Catherine took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. She stepped out of the shadows and onto the stage. The bright lights hit Catherine like a physical force, blinding her for a moment. She squinted, trying to see, her hands still gripping Christine's tightly as she pulled her sister forward. The stage felt enormous under her feet. The polished wood seemed to stretch on forever. And beyond the lights, she could sense the audience, hundreds of eyes, all focused on the stage. At first no one noticed them. The applause was still thundering. Jackson and Madame Esther were still waving and smiling. Orchestra members were gathering their instruments and leaving the stage. But then someone saw them. A violin player stopped mid-step, his mouth falling open. He pointed at the two small dirty girls who had appeared from nowhere. Another musician turned to look. Then another. Like dominoes falling, heads turned one by one until everyone on stage was staring at Catherine and Christine. The applause from the audience began to fade, replaced by confused murmuring. People were standing up in their seats, craning their necks to see what was happening. Desmond Jackson turned around, his smile vanishing instantly. His eyes landed on the two girls and his face twisted with disgust and anger. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp and cold. "Who are these street children?" "Security." Madame Esther gasped dramatically, putting her hand to her chest like she might faint. "Good heavens! How did they get in here? They're filthy. Absolutely filthy." Catherine felt her face burn with shame. She was suddenly aware of how she must look. Her hair tangled and dripping, her clothes torn and soaking wet, her shoes with holes that showed her dirty toes. Christine was shaking beside her, trying to hide behind Catherine's shoulder. Workers began rushing onto the stage from both wings, their faces angry and alarmed. The security guard from the front entrance appeared, his face bright red with fury. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson," he shouted, running toward the girls. "I threw them out earlier. I don't know how they got back in." Catherine knew she only had seconds before they were dragged away. She had to speak now. She had to say something before it was too late. She opened her mouth, her voice coming out small and shaky, but somehow carrying across the silent theater. "Please, sir." Everyone froze. The workers stopped running. The audience leaned forward in their seats. Even Jackson paused, looking at Catherine with cold, cruel eyes. Catherine swallowed hard and continued, her voice trembling but determined. "Please, sir. If we sing and play the piano for you, will you give us some food? Even just old bread." For a moment there was complete silence. Catherine could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could feel Christine's hand squeezing hers so tight it hurt. Then someone in the audience laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh that cut through the silence like a knife. Then another person laughed. And another. Soon, laughter was rippling through the entire audience, cruel, mocking laughter that made Catherine's stomach twist into knots. Jackson's lips curled into a nasty smile. "Did you hear that?" he called out to the audience, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "These little beggars want to entertain us. They think they can sing and play piano." He turned back to Catherine, his eyes gleaming with mean amusement. "Tell me, child, where exactly did you train?" "The Juilliard School of Garbage Dumps." The audience roared with laughter. Even some of the orchestra members were chuckling, shaking their heads at the absurdity of the situation. Madame Esther stepped forward, circling the girls like a hawk examining prey. "My dear children," she said in a sickeningly sweet voice that was clearly fake, "do you have any idea where you are? This is the Williams Theater. We have just performed Rachmaninoff, Chopin, and Debussy. We are professionals who have trained for decades. She wrinkled her nose. What could two dirty little street rats possibly offer us? More laughter. Louder this time. Catherine felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of all these people. Christine was crying though, silent tears streaming down her face. She tried to pull her hand away from Catherine's, tried to run back to the shadows, but Catherine held on tight. We can sing, Catherine said, her voice cracking. Our mama taught us. She said we had special voices. She said. Your mama? Jackson interrupted, his voice full of mockery. Let me guess, your mama was some drunk singing in bars? Or maybe she howled at the moon. Is that where you learned your special voices? The audience laughed even harder. Catherine felt like she was being stabbed with every laugh, every mocking voice, every cruel word. But something inside her refused to break. Maybe it was hunger making her too weak to run. Maybe it was desperation making her too stubborn to quit. Or maybe it was the memory of her mother's voice, singing to them on cold nights, promising them that they were special, that they mattered. Our mama was Helen, Catherine said loudly, speaking over the laughter. Helen Harper. And yes, she taught us to sing. She died 5 years ago and we've been alone ever since. We're hungry and cold and we just want a chance to earn some food. That's all we're asking for. The laughter died down a little. Some people in the audience looked uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats. A few women whispered to each other, their faces troubled. But Jackson just smiled wider, sensing an opportunity for even more entertainment. How touching, he said, putting his hand over his heart in a mocking gesture. A tragic story. Ladies and gentlemen, we have street urchins with a sob story. He turned to the audience, spreading his arms wide. What do you say? Should we give these children a chance to perform? Shall we see what the gutter has taught them about music? Yes, someone in the audience shouted. Let's see. This should be amusing, another voice called out. It'll be like watching trained monkeys, a third voice added, causing another wave of laughter. Jackson turned back to Catherine, his smile turning cruel. Very well. You want to perform? You shall perform. And afterward, if you manage not to embarrass yourselves completely, I'll personally ensure you receive. He paused dramatically, a grand banquet, the finest bread our kitchen has to offer. Perhaps even some cheese if you're very, very good. The audience laughed and applauded at his cruel joke. They thought this was wonderful entertainment, watching homeless children humiliate themselves. Catherine felt Christine trembling violently beside her. Her sister was terrified, ready to run, ready to give up. But Catherine looked at the piano sitting on the stage. The beautiful, perfect piano. She thought about all those times she and Christine had practiced on that broken instrument in the warehouse. All those songs Mama had taught them. All those nights they had sung together to keep each other warm. This was their chance. Maybe their only chance. Yes, these people were laughing at them. Yes, Jackson was being cruel. But if they could just play, just sing, maybe, just maybe, someone would hear the truth in their music. Okay, Catherine said, her voice steady now. We'll perform. Jackson's eyebrows shot up. He hadn't expected her to agree. For a moment he looked almost impressed by her courage. Then his cruel smile returned. Excellent. This is going to be entertaining. He gestured grandly toward the piano. Please, young maestros, take your positions. Workers moved aside, creating a path to the piano. The audience settled into their seats, programs rustling, people whispering excitedly to each other about the unexpected show. Catherine walked toward the piano, Christine following on shaky legs. Each step felt like walking through deep water. The stage lights seemed to get brighter and hotter. Catherine could feel sweat mixing with the rainwater on her skin. They reached the piano. Catherine looked at the keys, so clean and white they seemed to glow. She was afraid to touch them with her dirty hands. Afraid she would somehow break this beautiful instrument. Behind them, someone in the audience yelled out, "Get on with it. Let's see this disaster." More laughter. Jackson stood to the side, his arms crossed, his face smug and expectant. Madame Esther stood beside him, a nasty smile on her red lips. The orchestra members watched with expressions ranging from pity to amusement. Catherine sat down on the piano bench. It was smooth and comfortable, so different from the wobbly crate they used to sit on at the warehouse. Christine stood beside her, her whole body shaking. "What song?" Christine whispered, her voice so quiet Catherine barely heard it. Catherine thought about it. What song could they sing? What song would show these cruel people that they were wrong? That homeless children could be talented too? That they deserved kindness and help? Then she knew. There was only one song. The song Mama used to sing to them every night. The song that had kept them alive through 5 years of suffering. Mama's lullaby, Catherine whispered back. Christine's eyes widened. She nodded slowly. Catherine placed her hands on the piano keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingers. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The audience watched, some still chuckling, some looking bored, all of them expecting failure. Jackson leaned over and whispered something to Madame Esther. They both laughed quietly. Catherine closed her eyes. She thought about Mama. She thought about those cold nights when Mama would hold them and sing, her voice warm and full of love. She thought about the promise she had made to Mama on the night she died, to take care of Christine, to never give up, to remember that they were special. And then, just as Catherine was about to press the first key, something happened. A man from the audience stood up. He was holding something in his hand, a bottle of water. Before anyone could stop him, he threw it toward the stage. The bottle flew through the air in slow motion, spinning and catching the light. It hit Catherine square in the chest. Water exploded everywhere, soaking her already wet clothes even more, splashing onto Christine, spraying across the piano keys. The audience erupted in laughter, the loudest, cruelest laughter yet. People were doubled over, holding their stomachs. Some were pointing at the girls and laughing so hard they could barely breathe. "Bullseye," someone shouted. "That's what you get for thinking you belong here," another voice called out. Catherine sat frozen on the piano bench, water dripping from her hair, from her nose, from her chin. The cold plastic bottle had hit her hard enough to hurt, leaving a painful spot on her chest. Christine was crying openly now, her hands covering her face, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. Jackson was laughing too, not even trying to hide it. "Oh my, this is better than I expected. The street children are getting a bath. How delightful." Madame Esther was practically cackling, her elegant composure completely gone. They looked like drowned rats. Absolutely pathetic. Catherine felt something break inside her. Not her courage, that was already broken. Not her hope, that had died the moment the bottle hit her. Something deeper broke. Something that had been holding her together through 5 years of suffering and pain and rejection. She looked down at her wet hands, at the water pooling on the perfect white keys of the piano. She had ruined it. She had gotten this beautiful instrument wet with her dirty water. "I'm sorry, Mama," Catherine whispered, so quietly no one could hear over the laughter. "I'm sorry. I tried. I really tried." Then, cutting through the laughter like a knife through silk, a voice boomed across the theater. "What is going on here?" The laughter stopped instantly. Every head in the theater turned toward the back of the auditorium. A man was striding down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing loudly in the sudden silence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive gray suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was dark with streaks of silver at the temples. His face was strong and handsome, but right now it was twisted with anger. Catherine had never seen this man before, but somehow she knew exactly who he was. Everyone in the theater seemed to know. People were sitting up straighter in their seats, smoothing their clothes, looking nervous. This was Lucas Williams, the owner of the theater, the most powerful man in the building. Lucas Williams walked down the aisle like a storm gathering strength. His eyes were fixed on the stage, sweeping across Jackson, Madame Esther, the orchestra members, and finally landing on Catherine and Christine. When he saw the two girls, soaking wet, shivering, terrified, his face changed. The anger shifted into something else. Something that looked almost like shock. He stopped walking for just a moment, staring at them. His eyes moved from their faces to their black hair, to their deep brown eyes, and something flickered across his expression. Recognition? Confusion? Then he continued forward, reaching the front of the theater and climbing the steps to the stage in 3 powerful strides. Everyone backed away from him as if he were made of fire. "Mr. Williams," Jackson said, his voice suddenly smooth and respectful, all traces of his cruel mockery gone. "Sir, I can explain. These children snuck into the theater and—" "Be quiet," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. Jackson's mouth snapped shut. Lucas walked toward the girls and they shrank back, expecting him to yell at them, to grab them, to throw them out just like everyone else had tried to do. But he didn't. Instead, without saying a word, without any hesitation at all, Lucas took off his expensive suit jacket and draped it over both girls. The jacket was warm from his body heat, and it was so large that it wrapped around both of them like a blanket, shielding them from the cold that had been biting at their skin. Catherine felt the warmth sink into her frozen body, and she almost cried from the shock of it. When was the last time someone had done something kind for them? When was the last time an adult had looked at them and seen children instead of pests to be chased away? What are your names? Lucas asked gently, kneeling down so he was at eye level with them. His voice was soft now, completely different from the commanding tone he had used with Jackson. Catherine's throat felt tight. She tried to speak but couldn't get the words out. Christine whispered, "I'm Christine. And this is my sister Catherine." Christine and Catherine, Lucas repeated softly, looking at them carefully. His eyes lingered on their faces, like he was trying to memorize every detail. "How old are you?" 10, Catherine managed to say. "We're twins." Lucas nodded slowly, his expression troubled. "And where are your parents? Where do you live?" Catherine felt her chest tighten. This was always the hardest question to answer. "We don't have parents anymore," she said quietly. "And we don't live anywhere. We're homeless." Lucas's face grew even more pained. "What happened to your parents?" "We never knew our father," Christine said, her voice small and sad. "Mama never talked about him. She said he didn't know about us." "And your mother?" Lucas asked gently. Catherine felt tears burning in her eyes again. "She died 5 years ago. On a cold night, kind of like tonight." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, like the words physically hurt him. "Tell me about her, please. What was her name?" "Helen," Catherine said. "Helen Harper. She was beautiful and kind, and she loved music more than anything. She used to sing to us every night, even when we were hungry and cold. She said music was magic. She said it could reach people's hearts when nothing else could." As Catherine spoke, she watched Lucas's face change. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like complete devastation. His hands started shaking. His breathing became quick and shallow. "Helen Harper," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Helen. Oh God. Helen." He looked at the girls again, really looked at them, and Catherine saw understanding flood into his eyes. He was seeing something he hadn't seen before. Something that made his face crumple with grief. "Your mother," Lucas said, his voice shaking. "Helen. She had black hair, didn't she? And deep brown eyes? And she sang like an angel?" Catherine nodded, confused. "Yes. How did you know?" Lucas put his hand over his mouth, and Catherine could see tears streaming down his face now. This powerful man was crying in front of hundreds of people, and he didn't seem to care. "I knew her," Lucas whispered. "I knew your mother. Helen was the love of my life." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She stared at Lucas, trying to understand what he was saying. "Years ago," Lucas continued, his voice rough with emotion, "Helen and I were together. We loved each other so much. But my father, he didn't think she was good enough for our family. He said she was too poor, that she would ruin my future. He did everything he could to destroy her career as a singer, to make sure we couldn't be together." Lucas wiped his eyes, but more tears kept falling. "I tried to fight for her. I tried to find her. But my father told me she had moved away, that she wanted nothing to do with me. I didn't know. I never knew." His voice broke completely. "I never knew she was pregnant. I never knew I had daughters." Catherine felt the world spin around her. Christine grabbed her arm, holding on tight. You're our father?" Catherine whispered. Lucas looked at them, his face full of love and grief and regret all mixed together. "I think I am. Yes. I think I must be." He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched their faces with gentle hands. "You look just like her. You have her eyes. Her beautiful eyes." He took a shuddering breath. "Tell me what happened to her. Please. I need to know." So Catherine told him. She told him about how they lived in one small room with broken windows. How Mama worked 3 jobs, but it was never enough. How Mama would go hungry so they could eat. How she got weaker and weaker until one night, on a freezing cold Christmas Eve 5 years ago, Mama took them into an alley to shield them from the wind. "She wrapped herself around us," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face now. "She sang to us and told us she loved us. She told us to never give up. And then when we woke up in the morning, she was cold. She wasn't breathing anymore. She died protecting us from the cold." Lucas made a sound like a wounded animal. He pulled both girls into his arms, hugging them tight, his whole body shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying over and over. "I'm so sorry. If I had known, if I had only known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you. I would have given you everything. You should never have suffered like this. Never." The audience was completely silent now. Catherine could hear people sniffling, could see women wiping their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even some of the orchestra members were crying. Lucas finally pulled back, holding the girls at arm's length, looking at them with eyes full of fierce love. "You said your mother taught you to sing," he said, his voice still shaky but stronger now. "You said you wanted to perform in exchange for food." Catherine nodded. "Then that's exactly what you're going to do," Lucas said. "Not for food. Not because you're begging. But because you are my daughters. Because your mother's blood runs through your veins. Because you deserve to be heard." He stood up and turned to face the audience. When he spoke, his voice rang out clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my daughters, Catherine and Christine. They have come here tonight not as beggars but as artists. Their mother was Helen Harper, the most talented singer I have ever known, and she taught these girls everything she knew before she died." He turned back to the girls and smiled, a real genuine smile full of pride and love. "Will you sing for us?" he asked. "Will you show everyone what your mother taught you?" Catherine looked at Christine. Her sister's eyes were wide and full of tears, but she nodded. Together they stood. Lucas helped them up and guided them to the piano. The theater was so quiet Catherine could hear her own heartbeat. She sat down at the piano bench, Christine standing beside her. She looked out at all those people in their expensive clothes, sitting in their comfortable seats. Just minutes ago they had been laughing at her and Christine, treating them like trash. But now they were silent, waiting, ready to listen. Catherine placed her hands on the piano keys. They were still a little wet, but she didn't care anymore. She thought about Mama. About all those nights Mama sang to them. About the love in Mama's voice. About the promise she had made to never give up. And now, somehow, impossibly, they had found their father. They weren't alone anymore. Catherine pressed the first key and a clear, pure note rang out through the theater. Then she began to play. The song started soft and gentle, like a whisper in the darkness. Catherine's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for a 10-year-old child who had learned to play on a broken piano in an abandoned warehouse. But this wasn't just practice. This was memory. This was love. Every note carried the weight of 5 years of suffering, of hunger and cold and loneliness. Every chord held the memory of their mother's voice, singing to them on nights when they had nothing else. Christine began to sing, her voice starting quiet and trembling but growing stronger with each word. "When the night is dark and cold, and you feel so all alone, remember that you're loved, my dear. You'll always have a home." The words were simple, but the way Christine sang them made them sound like they held all the truth in the world. Her voice was clear and pure, exactly like their mother's voice had been. Catherine joined in, singing harmony while still playing, and the two voices wove together like golden threads, creating something beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. "Close your eyes and you will see. I'm right there beside you still. My love will keep you warm and safe. It always has, it always will." In the audience, people sat frozen in their seats. The woman who had been laughing just minutes before now had tears streaming down her face. A man in the front row was gripping his wife's hand, his eyes fixed on the stage. Even the orchestra members, who had seen thousands of performances, stood watching with their mouths slightly open. This wasn't a professional performance with perfect technique and years of training. This was something else entirely. This was raw emotion. This was truth. This was two children singing about loss and love and survival, and every person in that theater could feel it in their bones. Lucas stood at the side of the stage, tears pouring down his face, not even trying to hide them anymore. He watched his daughters, perform the song their mother had taught them, and it felt like Helen was there with them, singing through them, showing him everything he had missed. Catherine's fingers danced faster now, the music building in intensity. Christine's voice grew stronger, more confident, hitting notes that seemed to pierce straight through to people's hearts. "Though I'm gone, I'm not far away. I live on in your every song. And when you sing you'll feel me near. My love for you is still so strong." The piano melody swelled, filling every corner of the massive theater. Catherine played with her eyes closed now, completely lost in the music, feeling her mother's hands guiding hers, hearing her mother's voice mixing with Christine's. Christine sang the final verse with such power and emotion that it seemed impossible it was coming from such a small, fragile girl. "So when the world is cruel and cold, and hope seems far away, remember you are loved, my dears, and I'm with you every day." The music began to slow, the notes becoming softer, gentler, like a lullaby putting a child to sleep. Catherine played the final chord, a rich, beautiful sound that hung in the air for a long moment before slowly fading into silence. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The theater was so quiet that Catherine could hear her own heartbeat. Then, from the back of the theater, someone began to clap. It was slow at first, just one person's hands coming together. Then another person joined. Then another. And another. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding so loudly it sounded like thunder. People were cheering, crying, shouting, "Bravo!" over and over again. But this applause was different from the applause that had greeted Jackson and Madame Esther earlier. That applause had been polite, expected, automatic. This applause was real. It came from deep inside people's chests, from their hearts, from a place of genuine emotion. Women were openly sobbing. Men were wiping their eyes. Even the workers backstage were clapping, some of them crying too. Catherine and Christine stood at the piano, holding hands, looking out at all those people. They didn't know what to do. They had never experienced anything like this before. Lucas walked onto the stage and put his arms around both girls, pulling them close. He was still crying, his whole body shaking with sobs, but he was also smiling, the biggest, brightest smile Catherine had ever seen. "That was beautiful," he whispered to them, his voice choked with emotion. "Your mother would have been so proud. I am so proud." The applause continued, wave after wave of sound washing over the stage. People were standing on their seats now, clapping until their hands must have hurt. Finally, Lucas turned to face the audience. He raised his hand and slowly the applause began to quiet down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas said, his voice still shaky but strong enough to carry through the theater. "Thank you. Thank you for truly listening. For truly seeing these children for who they are." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I need to tell you all something. Something I just learned tonight myself." The audience leaned forward, curious. "These girls, Catherine and Christine, are my daughters. Their mother was Helen Harper, a woman I loved more than life itself. A woman my father drove away because he thought she wasn't good enough for our family. A woman who died alone, protecting these children from the cold, while I never even knew they existed." Gasps rippled through the audience. People whispered to each other, shocked by this revelation. Lucas continued, his voice getting stronger. "For 5 years my daughters have lived on the streets. Homeless. Hungry. Alone. They came here tonight not to cause trouble, but simply to ask for a chance to earn some food by sharing the gift their mother gave them, the gift of music." He looked down at Catherine and Christine, his eyes full of love and pain. And what did they receive? Mockery. Cruelty. Violence. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Many people looked ashamed now, remembering how they had laughed. But despite all of that, Lucas said, they still sang. They still shared their mother's song. They still showed us what real art is, not perfect technique or expensive training but honest emotion. Real feeling. Truth. He turned to look directly at where Jackson and Madame Esther had been standing before security escorted them out. "I fired Desmond Jackson and Madame Esther tonight. Some of you might think that was a mistake. You might think I'm throwing away talented performers. But I would rather have artists who have compassion than artists who have cruelty. I would rather have music that touches hearts than music that's simply technically perfect." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "These are my daughters," Lucas said, his voice ringing with pride and determination. "Catherine and Christine Williams. And from this day forward, they will never be hungry again. They will never be cold again. They will never be alone again." He knelt down and looked into both girls' eyes. "Will you come home with me? Will you let me be your father? Will you let me give you everything I should have given you from the day you were born?" Catherine felt like her heart might burst. She looked at Christine and her sister was crying, but this time they were happy tears. "Yes," Catherine whispered. Then louder, "Yes. Yes." Christine said, throwing her arms around Lucas's neck. Lucas pulled them both close, holding them tight, and the audience erupted in applause again, this time even louder than before, full of joy and approval. Catherine buried her face in Lucas's shoulder, feeling his warmth, feeling his arms around her, feeling safe for the first time in 5 years. She thought about Mama, about how Mama had always said that music could reach people's hearts. About how Mama had said they were special. Mama had been right. About everything. As the applause continued to wash over them, Catherine felt something she hadn't felt since the night Mama died. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. But even in this moment of joy, Catherine didn't know the full story yet. She didn't know about Lucas's father and how he had destroyed their mother's career. She didn't know about the years Lucas had spent searching for Helen, only to be told she had moved on. She didn't know about the letters Helen had written that never reached Lucas, kept hidden by his cruel father. There was still so much to learn. So much to understand. So many pieces of the past that needed to come together. But for now, in this moment, all that mattered was this. They had found their father. They had a home. They were loved. Lucas finally stood up, keeping his arms around both girls. He looked out at the audience, his face wet with tears but glowing with happiness. "Thank you all for witnessing this moment," he said. "I know this isn't the evening you expected. But I hope it's an evening you'll remember." People in the audience were nodding, still wiping their eyes, still moved by everything they had seen. "The performance is over," Lucas announced. "Please go home to your families. Hold them close. Tell them you love them. And remember that kindness, real, genuine kindness, is worth more than all the talent in the world." The audience began to slowly file out, but many people stopped to look back at the stage at the scene of Lucas holding his newly found daughters. Some people were still crying. Others were smiling. All of them had been changed by what they had witnessed. As the theater emptied, Lucas led Catherine and Christine backstage. Workers came up to congratulate them, to shake their hands, to tell them how beautiful their performance had been. Even the tough security guard who had tried to throw them out earlier approached with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said to the girls. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you. I should have been kinder." Catherine looked at him and saw genuine remorse in his face. "It's okay," she said quietly. "You didn't know." Lucas put his hand on the security guard's shoulder. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." The guard nodded gratefully and walked away. Lucas turned to his daughters. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Of course you are. What a silly question. Come on, let's get you some real food. Not old bread, real food." He led them through the backstage area toward his private office. As they walked, Catherine noticed how different everything looked now. Before, when they were sneaking through these hallways, everything had seemed scary and dangerous. Now, with Lucas beside them, it felt safe. They reached a door with Lucas Williams Theater Owner, written on it in gold letters. Lucas opened it and led them inside. The office was beautiful, all dark wood and leather furniture, with walls covered in framed photographs and posters from past performances. But what caught Catherine's attention was a photograph on Lucas's desk. It was a picture of a young woman with black hair and brown eyes, smiling at the camera. She looked happy and full of life. "Mama," Christine breathed, walking toward the photograph. "Yes," Lucas said softly. "I've kept that picture for years. Even after my father told me she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to put it away. I loved her so much." Catherine picked up the photograph, staring at her mother's young, happy face. She barely remembered Mama looking like this, healthy and full of hope. Most of Catherine's memories were of Mama looking tired and sad and sick. "She loved you too," Catherine said. "Even at the end. She talked about you sometimes. She said you were the only man she ever loved." Lucas closed his eyes, fresh tears sliding down his cheeks. "I wish I had known. I wish I had found her. I would have helped. I would have given you all everything." "You couldn't have known," Christine said. "Your father kept you apart." "My father," Lucas said, his voice turning hard with anger. "My father has a lot to answer for." He set the photograph down gently and turned to look at his daughters. "But that's a conversation for another day. Right now you need food and warmth and rest. Let me take care of you." Lucas picked up his phone and made a call. Within minutes, staff appeared with warm soup, fresh bread, roasted chicken, vegetables, and even chocolate cake for dessert. Catherine and Christine ate slowly at first, their stomachs not used to so much food. But everything tasted like heaven. As they ate, Lucas sat with them, watching them with eyes full of love and pain. He couldn't stop looking at them, as if he was afraid they might disappear if he looked away. "Tell me about your mother," Lucas said softly. "Tell me everything. I want to know what her life was like after we were separated." Catherine and Christine took turns sharing their memories. They told him about the tiny apartment with broken windows. About how Mama worked cleaning offices at night, washing dishes at restaurants and sewing clothes for people during the day. About how she would come home exhausted but still sing to them, still tell them stories, still make them feel loved. "She never stopped believing in music," Catherine said. "Even when we had nothing, she would teach us songs. She said music was the one thing nobody could take away from us." Lucas listened to every word, tears streaming down his face. "She was always like that. Even when we were young. Music was everything to her." "What was she like?" Christine asked. "When you knew her?" Lucas smiled through his tears. "She was the most beautiful person I'd ever met. Not just on the outside, though she was stunning, but on the inside. She had this light that came from within. When she sang, it was like the whole world stopped to listen." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. I met her when I was 25. She was 23. My father had just made me manager of this theater, and I was auditioning singers for a special production. Lucas's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. Helen walked onto that stage wearing a simple dress she had made herself. She was nervous, but when she started to sing, I had never heard anything like it. It wasn't the most technically perfect voice, but it had soul. Real, honest emotion that made me forget to breathe. He turned back to the girls, his voice soft with love and regret. I hired her as the lead that day. Over the next few weeks as we rehearsed, I fell in love with her. She was different from anyone I'd ever known. She didn't care about money or status. She cared about music, about doing good work, about kindness. She made me laugh. She made me see the world differently. Lucas sat back down, his hands clasped tightly together. Within months we were inseparable. I had never been happier. I introduced her to my father, hoping he would see what I saw, a remarkable woman with a beautiful soul. His face darkened. But my father saw only one thing, a poor girl from the wrong side of town who wanted our money. He forbade the relationship. He said terrible things about her. But I refused to give her up. I loved her too much. We continued seeing each other in secret. I even bought a ring. I was going to propose, going to marry her no matter what my father said. Lucas's voice cracked. But then one day I came to the theater and Helen was gone. The stage manager gave me a letter. In it, Helen said she was leaving, that our worlds were too different, that she couldn't handle the pressure of my father's disapproval. I was devastated. I searched for her for years, but every lead went nowhere. He wiped his eyes. What I didn't know, what I only discovered after my father died 3 years ago, was that the letter was a lie. My father had forged it. He had gone to Helen and told her I was marrying someone from a wealthy family. He showed her fake engagement announcements. He convinced her that I had betrayed her. Catherine and Christine gasped. So she left, Lucas continued, his voice heavy with grief. And a few weeks later she found out she was pregnant with you. But she was too proud to come back to a man she thought had abandoned her. She raised you alone, working herself to exhaustion. And I kept searching, never knowing about you, never knowing that my father had destroyed everything. He looked at his daughters with tears streaming down his face. I found letters in my father's things after he died, letters your mother had written to me that I never received. Letters asking why I had left her, telling me she loved me, telling me she was struggling. That's when I realized what he had done. But by then it was too late. I thought Helen was dead. I thought I'd lost everything. Lucas reached out and took both girls' hands. I looked for you after I found those letters. I hoped that maybe, somehow Helen had children. That maybe I had children out there somewhere. But I couldn't find you. Until tonight. Until you walked onto that stage. Lucas finished telling the story, his voice heavy with grief. I looked for her for 5 years. Then my father told me he had heard she died overseas. I believed him. I stopped searching. I focused on the theater, on building this business, trying to fill the emptiness inside me. He turned to look at Catherine and Christine. My father died 3 years ago. I found letters in his things after he passed. Letters Helen had written to me that I never received. Letters telling me she loved me, asking why I had abandoned her. I realized then what he had done. Lucas walked over and knelt before his daughters. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm so sorry your mother had to suffer alone. I'm so sorry you've been living on the streets when you should have been safe and loved and cared for. Catherine reached out and touched her father's face. It's not your fault. Your father was the one who did those terrible things, not you. But I should have tried harder. I should have. You didn't know, Christine said. And Mama never blamed you. She just loved you. Even at the end. Lucas pulled both girls into his arms, holding them tight. I can't change the past. But I can change the future. From now on you will have everything. Not just money or things, though you'll have those too, but love. Safety. Family. A real home. He pulled back and looked into their eyes. Are you ready to see it? Your new home. Catherine and Christine nodded, their hearts full of emotion they couldn't even name. Lucas called for his car and soon they were driving through the city streets. The rain had stopped and the clouds were parting, showing glimpses of stars. Catherine and Christine sat in the back seat of the warm, comfortable car, wrapped in blankets Lucas had given them, watching the city pass by. They drove through neighborhoods that got nicer and nicer with bigger houses and more trees. Finally, they turned onto a long driveway lined with lights. At the end of the driveway stood a house. No, a mansion. It was 3 stories tall, painted white with black shutters, surrounded by beautiful gardens even in winter. Warm light glowed from every window. "This is home," Lucas said softly. Catherine and Christine stepped out of the car, staring up at the huge house. It looked like something from a fairy tale. Lucas led them inside, and they found themselves in a grand entrance hall with a sweeping staircase, crystal chandeliers and marble floors. But Lucas didn't stop to show them any of that. Instead, he led them upstairs to a hallway lined with doors. He opened one door to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than the entire apartment Catherine and Christine had shared with their mother. The walls were painted a soft lavender color. There were 2 beds with fluffy white comforters, a huge window with curtains that looked like clouds, shelves full of books, and even a piano in the corner. "I had my staff prepare this room years ago," Lucas said quietly. "After I found those letters and realized Helen might have been pregnant. I didn't know for sure, but I hoped that somewhere out there I might have children. I wanted to be ready if I ever found you." He walked to a closet and opened it, revealing racks of clothes in different sizes. "I didn't know how old you'd be, so I bought clothes for every age. We'll get you properly fitted tomorrow, but for tonight, there should be something that works." Catherine couldn't speak. She just stood there, overwhelmed by everything, the warmth, the softness, the safety, the love. "There's a bathroom through that door," Lucas continued, pointing. "With a big bathtub. You can take hot baths whenever you want. And that door leads to a playroom with toys and games. And downstairs there's a library, a music room, a kitchen where our cook will make you anything you want to eat." "Lucas," Catherine interrupted, using his name for the first time. Can we just call you Dad?" Lucas's face crumpled. He knelt down and pulled them both close. Yes, please. I would love that more than anything." "Dad," Christine said, testing the word. Then louder, "Dad." They stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of them holding each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Finally, Lucas helped them pick out pajamas. Soft, warm pajamas that didn't have any holes or stains. He showed them how to work the bathtub, filling it with warm water and bubbles. He gave them towels so fluffy they felt like clouds. While the girls bathed, marveling at the feeling of being truly clean for the first time in years, Lucas called his staff and asked them to prepare hot chocolate and cookies. When Catherine and Christine came out, clean and warm in their new pajamas, they found Lucas sitting on one of the beds with a tray of steaming mugs and a plate piled high with chocolate chip cookies. They climbed onto the bed beside him, and for the first time in 5 years they felt safe. They felt warm. They felt loved. "Tell us more about Mama," Christine said, sipping her hot chocolate. "Tell us about when you first fell in love." So Lucas told them stories late into the night. Stories about Helen's laugh, her kindness, her beautiful voice. Stories about dates they'd gone on, dreams they'd shared, plans they'd made. Catherine and Christine listened, learning about the mother they had known only in poverty and suffering, discovering the young, hopeful woman she had once been. As the night grew later, the girls' eyes began to droop. Lucas tucked them both into their beds, pulling the soft blankets up to their chins. "Dad," Catherine said sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Mama knows? Do you think she can see us now?" Lucas smiled through fresh tears. "I think she knows. I think she's been watching over you this whole time, keeping you safe until I could find you." "I miss her," Christine whispered. "I miss her too," Lucas said. "Every day. But she lives on in you. In your voices. In your music. In your beautiful hearts." He kissed both girls on their foreheads. "Sleep now. You're safe. You're home. And when you wake up tomorrow, we'll start building our life together. We'll make your mother proud." "We love you, Dad," Catherine said, her eyes already closing. "I love you too," Lucas whispered. "More than you'll ever know." He sat in a chair between their beds, watching them sleep, their faces peaceful for the first time in years. Outside the window, the clouds had completely parted, and stars filled the sky. Lucas thought about Helen, about everything they had lost, about all the suffering his father had caused. But he also thought about the future, about watching his daughters grow up, about hearing them sing, about giving them every opportunity Helen had been denied. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't bring Helen back. But he could honor her memory by loving these girls with everything he had. As Catherine and Christine slept, their breathing soft and even, Lucas made a silent promise to Helen, wherever she was. "I'll take care of them," he whispered into the darkness. "I'll give them the life you wanted for them. I'll make sure they know how much you love them. I promise." A gentle breeze drifted through the slightly open window, rustling the curtains. Lucas smiled, imagining it was Helen's way of saying she heard him. The twin girls who had stood in the cold rain just hours ago, desperate and starving, now slept in warm beds in a beautiful home, loved by their father, safe at last. And somewhere Lucas believed Helen Harper was singing. In the months that followed, Catherine and Christine's lives transformed completely. Lucas enrolled them in the best schools, hired the best music teachers, and made sure they had everything they needed, not just material things but love, support, and encouragement. The girls excelled in their music studies, their natural talent now nurtured by proper training. But they never forgot where they came from. They never forgot the cold nights, the hunger, the kindness of strangers who had helped them, or the cruelty of those who had turned them away. Lucas established a charity in Helen's name, helping homeless children and supporting struggling musicians. Catherine and Christine performed at fundraisers, using their voices to help others the way they had once needed help. The story of the twin homeless girls who sang at the Williams Theater spread throughout the city and beyond. People talked about it for years, about the night when two cold, hungry children showed the wealthy audience what really mattered. About the night when cruelty turned to compassion. About the night when a father found his daughters. And whenever Catherine and Christine performed, they always ended with the same song, the lullaby their mother had taught them. The song that had saved their lives. The song that had brought them home. They sang it for Helen. For Lucas. For every child who had ever felt alone in the cold. And their voices, filled with love and memory and hope, reached hearts in ways that perfect technique never could. Because, as their mother had always said, music wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest. It was about touching souls. It was about love that never dies, even when everything else is lost. And that kind of music, true music, could change the world. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.